For years, the Duggar family was presented as proof that order could protect a home from moral collapse. Viewers were shown a world of pressed clothes, careful smiles, supervised courtships, group prayers, tidy routines, and children raised under rules that seemed firm enough to keep trouble far away. The message was simple, and it was repeated so often that many people accepted it without much resistance. This was a household built on faith, discipline, obedience, and certainty. In a culture that often treats chaos as normal, the Duggar name offered the opposite. It suggested control. It suggested safety. It suggested that if a family followed the right code with enough devotion, it could remain untouched by the kind of private ruin that destroys trust from the inside. That was the image. This investigation asked the audience to look at another possibility. Because when Joseph Duggar and Kendra Duggar were arrested, the shock was not contained in the legal charges alone. It lived in the collision between two versions of the same family. One version had been polished for public consumption over many years. It smiled from television screens, magazine covers, interviews, church language, and carefully managed appearances. The other version emerged through allegations, police involvement, court filings, and questions about what life may have looked like once public performance was stripped away. That contrast is what makes this story so disturbing. It is not only about accusation, it is about the collapse of a promise. Families like this are often trusted before they are understood. The larger the family, the more impressive the structure appears. The stricter the values, the more quickly outsiders assume that strictness must equal integrity. The calmer the public image, the easier it becomes for people to believe that calm reflects truth. But trust built on appearances can be fragile, especially when those appearances are managed with great care. A family can look disciplined and still hide fear. A house can look peaceful and still contain silence that no guest is allowed to question. A couple can appear devoted and still live inside pressures the outside world never sees. That is where this story begins, not in a courtroom, not in a police report. It begins in the distance between what millions believed they knew and what the investigation forced them to consider. It begins with a family that had already taught the public how to view them, and with a new set of allegations that made that old lesson feel dangerous. Once that distance opens, every memory of the image changes shape. Every smile becomes harder to read. Every promise of righteousness sounds less like reassurance and more like a shield. For viewers who followed the Duggar family for years, this case did more than introduce a new scandal. It called into question the entire idea of what they had been watching. If a family spends years presenting itself as an example of moral order, what does it mean when law enforcement enters that world and begins asking what was happening inside it? How much of what the audience accepted as purity was simply presentation? And how often do people place their confidence in families that seem controlled, not because they are known deeply, but because they are known publicly? That is the tension at the center of this opening. The home that looked protected now stands beside allegations, scrutiny, and suspicion. The family that once represented certainty is now linked to doubt. The image that invited admiration is now forced to share space with questions no amount of careful branding can quiet. Long before the legal process reaches its end, that contrast alone has already changed everything. The reason this case seized national attention quickly had as much to do with memory as it did with the arrests themselves. If Joseph Duggar and Kendra Duggar had belonged to an unknown family in an ordinary Arkansas neighborhood, the allegations would still have been serious, still painful, still worthy of legal scrutiny. But they would not have carried the same cultural weight. Here, the surname did much of the work. Duggar was not a neutral name in the public mind. It arrived with history attached. It arrived with years of visibility, years of moral messaging, years of public trust, and years of scandal that had already taught the audience to look at this family through two competing lenses at once. That is why the arrests traveled so far, so fast. People were not reacting only to a criminal matter. They were reacting to what the family name had come to represent in American culture. For one group, the Duggars had long symbolized a religious household that claimed to offer answers to modern social disorder. For another, they had already become a warning about image management, private control, and the danger of confusing public piety with private health. When news broke that Joseph Duggar and Kendra Duggar had been arrested, those two readings crashed into each other again. The case also drew force from familiarity. Many viewers had not merely heard of the family, they had watched them. They had spent years absorbing their routines, values, milestones, and language. Some had defended them. Some had admired their discipline. Some had doubted them long before the newest allegations surfaced. That kind of exposure changes how scandal is received. An arrest involving strangers may feel like news. An arrest involving people the audience has watched inside kitchens, living rooms, weddings, and family celebrations feels closer to betrayal. It creates the unsettling sense that the public was invited near enough to trust, while still being kept too far away to know. That is why this was never just another headline about criminal charges. It reopened old public wounds tied to the Duggar story and forced people to ask whether each new case was separate, or whether the family name now carried a pattern the public could no longer ignore. The attention was intense because the arrests touched something larger than law. They touched belief, memory, and the uncomfortable possibility that a family once held up as an example had become known for the kind of private failure it claimed to guard against. In stories like this, fame does not soften the blow. It magnifies it. And the Duggar name had already become powerful enough that the moment it appeared beside new allegations, national attention was almost inevitable. The case did not enter an empty space. It entered an argument that had never ended. That unresolved public argument existed because the Duggar family was never presented to the audience as merely large, unusual, or memorable. They were sold as models. Their visibility depended on the promise that their way of life offered moral clarity in a culture many viewers believed had lost it. The family image was built carefully around a few repeated ideas: faith as the center of the home, discipline as protection, modesty as virtue, obedience as duty, family structure as stability, and moral certainty as proof that the system worked. This branding mattered because it gave the public more than entertainment. It gave them a framework for admiration. Viewers were encouraged to see the Duggar household as ordered rather than restrictive, principled rather than rigid, and spiritually serious rather than controlling. The daily routines were part of that message. So were the courtship rules, the clothing standards, the language of respect, the stress on parental authority, and the repeated suggestion that a family guided by firm beliefs would avoid the disorder that damaged other homes. The appeal did not rest only on the number of children. It rested in the claim that all those children could be shaped into one disciplined unit through conviction and rule. Faith sat at the center of that public identity. The families spoke in the language of religious purpose, presenting their lifestyle not as preference, but as obedience to a higher calling. Discipline was shown as love in structured form. Modesty was framed as dignity and protection. Obedience was treated as the natural expression of respect within the household. Family structure was presented as strong because every person had a role and every role had boundaries. Moral certainty completed the image. The family did not speak as if they were searching for the right way to live. They spoke as if they had already found it. That confidence helped explain why so many people were drawn to them. In an unstable world, certainty can look comforting. A home with clear rules can seem safer than one with constant negotiation. Parents watching from afar could see organization and conclude that organization meant peace. Viewers looking for values could see conviction and assume conviction meant health. The Duggar brand depended on that conversion of appearance into trust. It asked the audience to believe that visible order reflected inner truth. This is what made the brand powerful before it made the later scandals so devastating. The family was not simply known. They were marketed as evidence. Their home was meant to demonstrate that strict belief, strong hierarchy, and disciplined living could produce a cleaner, more dependable, moral life. That was the promise people were given. And because that promise had been repeated for so long, many accepted it before ever asking what such certainty might conceal. But the promise did not remain intact. Long before the arrests of Joseph Duggar and Kendra Duggar, the image had already suffered deep public damage. What once looked solid had been cracked by earlier revelations involving the family, and those revelations changed how every new allegation would be received. The Duggar name no longer carried only admiration. It also carried suspicion, fatigue, and a growing belief that the family's public message had never matched the full reality of life inside that world. The breaking point came years earlier, when Josh Duggar became the center of a major public scandal. Reports that he had molested girls as a teenager, including some of his sisters, destroyed the moral certainty that had helped build the family's fame. What shocked the public was not only the abuse itself, but the sense that the family had tried to contain the damage within its own system, rather than face it in a way that matched the seriousness of what had happened. The effect was immediate. The television image of discipline and righteousness no longer looked reassuring. To many viewers, it began to look protective in the wrong way, as if family structure had served reputation better than safety. That loss of trust deepened as more public disgrace followed. Josh Duggar later became linked to another scandal involving infidelity, which further weakened the family's claim to moral leadership. Still later came the federal case that ended in his conviction on child sexual abuse material charges. By that point, the Duggar story had changed completely. The family was no longer widely discussed as an example of order in American home life. It was increasingly discussed as a family whose public teaching about morality stood in painful conflict with repeated scandals connected to one of its most visible sons. This history matters because it shaped the public atmosphere into which the case against Joseph Duggar emerged. The audience was no longer looking at a single accusation in isolation. They were looking at it through the memory of earlier failure, earlier secrecy, and earlier disappointment. That does not decide guilt in any legal sense, and it should not. But it does explain why the family's old image could no longer protect them from scrutiny. The trust had already been broken once, and in the minds of many observers, broken trust rarely returns in full. So by the time Joseph Duggar came under investigation, the Duggar family was not standing on untouched ground. The surface had already given way years before. What remained was a weakened public image, a long shadow cast by Josh Duggar, and a growing sense that each new allegation might belong to a larger story the family could no longer contain. Against that damaged family backdrop, Joseph Duggar did not arrive in the public imagination as the son most likely to become the center of a new scandal. If anything, his place within the Duggar family seemed defined by relative quiet. He was visible because the family itself was visible, but he did not project the same attention-drawing presence that often attaches itself to the loudest, most controversial, or most individually branded figures in a reality television household. He appeared polite, steady, and easy to overlook in a family so large that many of its children were known more by role than by public identity. That mattered because public expectations are often shaped less by evidence than by screen memory. Joseph Duggar had grown up in front of viewers who watched him move through the familiar Duggar stages of childhood, adolescence, and early adulthood. He was part of the system, routine, and orderly family image already sold to the audience. Yet he was not usually treated as the face of crisis. He occupied a quieter corner of the family story, which made later allegations land with a different kind of force. He was not the son most people had spent years publicly debating. He was one of the sons many people assumed had simply blended into the structure. In families shaped for television, quiet can be deceptive in its own way. A lower profile can create the impression of stability, even when it really means the person has not been examined as closely. Joseph Duggar benefited from that perception for years. He was seen as one of the more reserved Duggar sons, a man who stayed close to home, remained inside the family orbit, and appeared to build an adult life that fit what viewers had come to expect. Reports described him as working in real estate and living near the wider family network in northwest Arkansas, details that reinforced continuity. There was little in that outward impression that prepared the audience for his name to become tied to accusations carrying this level of seriousness. So as the broader Duggar image weakened over time, Joseph Duggar still seemed, to many outside observers, like one of the less publicly defined members of the family. That is part of what gave his case its own shock. The family name already carried damage, but Joseph Duggar himself had not seemed central to that damage. He looked from a distance, like one of the quieter continuations of the Duggar world. That distance would not last. To the audience, he seemed settled, ordinary, and unlikely. If Joseph Duggar appeared to many viewers as one of the quieter continuations of the Duggar world, Kendra Duggar fit that same public pattern in a different way. Before marriage, she was known as Kendra Caldwell, raised in a conservative Baptist household that already shared much of the culture surrounding the Duggar family. Her background did not place her outside that system. It placed her near its center. She came from a home shaped by parental authority, religious instruction, modesty, courtship values, and a tightly guided understanding of family life. That familiarity mattered, because when she entered the Duggar orbit, she did not seem like an outsider stepping into something unfamiliar. She seemed fully compatible with the life the family had spent years presenting to the public. Her relationship with Joseph Duggar followed the path viewers had already been trained to recognize. The courtship was handled within the same moral framework the family had long celebrated, where romance was not treated as private experimentation, but as a supervised progression toward marriage. The proposal, made during Joy Anna Duggar's wedding reception, fit perfectly within that established style of public family ritual. Nothing about it challenged the Duggar formula. It affirmed it. To viewers, the relationship signaled continuity. Another Duggar son was moving into adult life through the same rules, the same language, and the same carefully approved path that had come to define the family brand. When Joseph Duggar and Kendra Duggar married in Arkansas in 2017, their union was absorbed into that larger image almost immediately. They were presented not just as a young couple in love, but as another proof point that the system reproduced itself successfully. Their marriage suggested that the next generation would continue the same values without resistance. Kendra Duggar, soft-spoken and publicly agreeable, seemed to reinforce the image of order that audiences had already been taught to admire. She did not appear to arrive with friction, rebellion, or disruption. She appeared to slide neatly into place. That is what made her role in this later story feel so jarring. At the beginning, Joseph Duggar and Kendra Duggar looked less like a break from Duggar history than a smooth extension of it. Their match seemed blessed by timing, faith, family approval, and total predictability inside that world. From the outside, it looked like the formula was still working exactly as designed. To many viewers, Kendra Duggar represented continuation, compliance, and calm. She seemed to confirm that the Duggar pattern could still reproduce itself without visible strain, and that appearance would matter once scrutiny turned toward the home she and Joseph Duggar built together. She entered the story as confirmation that the family model was still intact. Her presence strengthened the sense that nothing had been disrupted yet. That continuity already looked steady, proven, and entirely familiar. After marriage, Joseph Duggar and Kendra Duggar appeared to build the kind of domestic life viewers had come to expect from a Duggar couple. Children arrived quickly. Garrett David Duggar was born in 2018. Addison Renee followed in 2019. Brooklyn Praise was born in 2021, and Justice Joseph Duggar followed in 2022. To the audience, these milestones looked familiar rather than surprising. A young marriage, a growing household, family photographs, and the language of gratitude all fit neatly into the public pattern the Duggar name had carried for years. From the outside, their home life seemed calm and settled. Reports described a tidy house in northwest Arkansas, children playing outside, and the kind of neighborhood setting that often passes without notice because it appears so ordinary. That ordinary quality helped protect the image. Nothing in the visible outline of the household suggested an emergency. Nothing in the public presentation announced fracture. What viewers and nearby observers were given was a view of routine family life: parents, children, home, church-rooted values, and the steady continuation of a life shaped by structure. At the same time, Joseph Duggar and Kendra Duggar became less publicly visible than they had been during the height of family television attention. Social media sharing slowed. Their household seemed to retreat a little from the open display. At first glance, that reduced visibility could be read as maturity, privacy, or a desire for quieter family life after years of public scrutiny surrounding the wider Duggar family. It did not automatically raise an alarm. If anything, it could appear sensible. A young couple with several children living away from constant camera attention might easily seem as though they were simply focusing on home. That surface-level normalcy matters because ordinary appearances often shape trust more powerfully than direct knowledge. A neat yard, familiar routines, and smiling family images can create confidence where no real understanding exists. Joseph Duggar and Kendra Duggar benefited from that effect. Their life, at least from the outside, looked stable, modest, and unremarkable in exactly the way many people associate with safety. Even neighbors could read the household as ordinary, because ordinary life rarely invites deep suspicion on its own. The children could be seen outside. The home stood in a subdivision. Daily life appeared to move with the quiet repetition that usually reassures observers rather than alarms them. That was the strength of the image. It looked complete enough to answer questions before questions were even asked. Marriage was present, children were present, routine was present, public conflict seemed absent. The couple's lower profile after earlier Duggar scandals could even suggest wisdom, as though Joseph Duggar and Kendra Duggar had chosen a simpler family life away from noise. For many people, a retreat from visibility could read as responsibility rather than concealment. It allowed the household to seem ordinary in a way that protected it from close examination. Many saw a young family settling into ordinary life, but appearances do not settle private reality. They only delay its examination. In this case, the calm exterior did not end suspicion, it postponed it. That is one reason stories like this force uncomfortable self-examination from the audience. People often trust the image of a controlled family long before they know anything real about the life inside it. Order can look like health. Agreement can look like peace. Silence can look like maturity. A family that speaks with certainty, dresses with discipline, and presents itself with care can persuade outsiders that nothing is wrong, even when outsiders have no access to the pressures hidden beneath the surface. So before this story goes further, it is worth asking a direct question. When a family appears highly structured, deeply religious, and publicly united, do people trust too easily simply because the image feels safe? Or do those polished appearances sometimes discourage the very questions that should be asked sooner? If you have ever seen a household praised for being respectable while private problems remain ignored, this is the moment to say so. If this kind of grounded true crime storytelling matters to you, take a moment to like, subscribe, and share. And in the comments, tell me whether tightly managed family images make the public lower its guard. Your response helps shape the conversation around stories where appearances can influence judgment long before facts come into view. It also helps this channel keep examining cases where outward respectability may hide pressures the public never learns to question until a crisis forces those questions into daylight. Honest engagement matters here, because the habits that protect a family's image can also discourage outsiders from speaking when something feels wrong. Cases like this are not only about one family, they are also about how quickly the public mistakes presentation for proof. That matters here too. With that question now placed before the audience, the opening section reaches the point where appearance and danger begin to move toward each other. By this stage, the visible outline of Joseph Duggar and Kendra Duggar's life could satisfy almost anyone watching from a distance. The Duggar name still carried recognition. Joseph Duggar still seemed quieter than the family members most associated with earlier public disgrace. Kendra Duggar still appeared to fit seamlessly into the life she had joined. Their marriage, their children, their home, and their lower public profile all combined to create the impression of a young family moving forward with modest stability after years of turbulence elsewhere in the Duggar story. But that is precisely why the next turn matters so much. The gentleness of the image did not erase risk. It may have made risk easier to miss. The public had already seen how moral certainty could fail inside this family, yet the softer details of Joseph Duggar and Kendra Duggar's life still encouraged a familiar assumption that whatever had damaged the Duggar name before belonged mainly to earlier scandal, earlier crisis, and earlier public collapse. Their household could still be read as separate from that damage, or at least as sheltered from its worst implications. Viewers could tell themselves that this couple represented a quieter branch of the same family tree, one less burdened by public shame and less likely to become the focus of future alarm. What was coming would challenge that assumption. The distance between public image and private allegation was about to narrow in a way that could not be managed through soft language, family branding, or outward routine. The same qualities that once made this couple appear settled and safe would soon make the scrutiny around them feel more troubling. A quiet son, a compatible marriage, a home that looked ordinary, a family life that seemed protected by faith and structure. Those details did not disappear. They remained in place as a far more disturbing set of questions began to form around them. And once those questions entered the story, the comforting image surrounding Joseph Duggar and Kendra Duggar would no longer function as reassurance. It would become part of the tension itself. The softer the public image had looked, the harder the coming allegations would land. What seemed calm on the surface was nearing a point where surface alone would no longer be enough. The life that had appeared orderly, private, and contained was moving toward scrutiny that would force outsiders to consider whether the very qualities that inspired trust had also helped delay doubt. Behind the calm image of family life, a much darker conflict was beginning to take shape, and the next section of this story will move directly into that break. It is this contrast that gives the opening its force. Everything still looks gentle from a distance. That distance is about to collapse. When it does, the audience will no longer be asked what the family seemed to be. They will be forced to confront what the allegations say may have been happening within that guarded world all along. For now, the image still stands. The marriage still looks intact. The household still appears ordinary. The names still sit inside the familiarity of a family the public believes it already understands. That final moment of calm is important, because once the allegation enters fully, nothing in this story will be read in quite the same way again. Hello, my friends. Welcome back to Bedtime Black Files, where life's most powerful lessons are revealed through unforgettable true crime events from around the world. If you're stepping into our community for the first time, I'm truly glad you're here. Thank you for joining us. Before we get into it, tell us where you're watching from in the comments. Consider hitting the subscribe button. Don't forget to like and share this video with someone who needs it. Your support helps our family grow, connect, and keep these powerful stories alive. In the summer of 2020, the Duggar family gathered for a vacation in Florida, a trip that was meant to be a time of relaxation and togetherness. The sunlit beaches, the sound of waves, and the laughter of children painted a picture of a family enjoying a break from their usual routines. For many families, vacations are moments to create joyful memories, to step away from daily pressures, and to reconnect. For the Duggar family, however, this particular trip would mark the beginning of a story that would shatter that image of calm and safety. The Florida vacation was not just another holiday. It became the setting where a serious allegation emerged, one that would change everything for Joseph Duggar and those around him. The details of what happened during those days would later be described by authorities as deeply troubling. But at the time, the family was still caught in the ordinary rhythms of a shared getaway. The contrast between the sunny backdrop and the gravity of the events that unfolded there would become a stark reminder of how appearances can deceive. This trip, like many family vacations, was filled with moments that seemed typical. Children playing on the sand, parents watching from nearby, and the usual mix of excitement and exhaustion that comes with travel. Yet beneath the surface of those ordinary scenes, something was beginning to unravel, a secret that would soon demand attention far beyond the family circle. The Florida vacation, once a symbol of togetherness, would become the starting point for a story that challenged the very foundation of trust within the family. The heart of the allegation centered on a young family member, a child whose identity has been kept private out of respect and protection. This child, like many in the Duggar family, was raised within the same strict environment that emphasized obedience, modesty, and faith. The accusation brought forward was not just a claim, it was a serious matter that demanded careful attention and sensitivity. It is important to approach this part of the story with the utmost respect for the child involved. The focus is not on the child's identity or personal details, but on the gravity of the situation and the impact such allegations have on families and communities. The child's experience, though deeply personal, became a catalyst for a broader examination of trust, safety, and accountability within a family that had long been in the public eye. The child was reportedly very young at the time of the alleged incident, a fact that adds to the complexity and seriousness of the case. Authorities and those involved have emphasized the need to protect the child's privacy and well-being throughout the investigation and any subsequent legal proceedings. This approach reflects a broader understanding of how vulnerable children must be shielded from further harm, especially in cases that attract public attention. The allegation, while focused on one child, raised questions that extended far beyond a single moment or individual. It touched on the challenges families face when difficult truths come to light, especially in environments where appearances and reputations are carefully maintained. The child's voice, though quiet and protected, became a powerful force in bringing hidden issues into the open, demanding a response from both the family and the authorities. According to statements from law enforcement officials, the troubling events that led to the allegation unfolded during the family's time in Florida. While the vacation was meant to be a time of rest and bonding, Authorities say that during this period, Joseph Duggar allegedly engaged in inappropriate behavior toward the young family member. The specifics of the incident have been described with care by investigators, mindful of the sensitivity involved, but the seriousness of the claim cannot be understated. The authorities' account paints a picture of moments that were hidden beneath the surface of the family's public image. What appeared to be a typical family vacation was, in fact, the setting for actions that violated the trust and safety expected within a family unit. The alleged behavior reportedly took place in private settings, away from the eyes of other family members, which added to the difficulty of immediate detection or intervention. Investigators have noted that such cases often involve complex dynamics, where the accused and the victim share close relationships, making the situation emotionally charged and challenging to navigate. The family's size and the close-knit nature of their interactions created an environment where boundaries could be blurred and where the impact of such actions could ripple through the entire household. The restrained narration of these events by authorities reflects the need to balance transparency with respect for those involved. The focus remains on the facts as presented by law enforcement, avoiding sensationalism while acknowledging the emotional weight carried by the allegation. This careful approach underscores the importance of truth and justice in situations where family and public scrutiny intersect. What makes allegations like these particularly unsettling is the setting in which they occur. Unlike stories that unfold in distant or obviously hazardous places, this case took place within the confines of a family vacation, an environment that should be safe, familiar, and nurturing. The ordinary nature of the setting adds a layer of complexity and discomfort that resonates deeply with many people. Family vacations are typically associated with joy, relaxation, and bonding. They are moments when parents and children step away from daily stresses to enjoy each other's company. The idea that harm could occur in such a setting challenges fundamental assumptions about safety and trust. It forces a confrontation with the reality that danger can sometimes exist where it is least expected, close to home, within the circle of those who are supposed to protect us. This familiarity makes the allegation harder to process. It is not a story of strangers or distant threats, but one rooted in the everyday interactions of family life. The contrast between the sunny beaches and the serious accusation highlights how appearances can mask difficult truths. It reminds viewers that harmful behavior can be hidden behind smiles, routines, and the veneer of normalcy. The emotional impact of this contrast is profound. It raises questions about how families protect their members, how trust is maintained, and how difficult it can be to recognize and respond to harm when it occurs in familiar surroundings. This part of the story invites reflection on the challenges faced by victims and families alike when the safe spaces they rely on are called into question. The passage of time between an alleged event and its disclosure is a common element in cases involving young victims, yet it remains one of the most misunderstood aspects of these investigations. In the situation involving Joseph Duggar, the fact that the allegation did not surface immediately during the 2020 Florida trip is consistent with the psychological reality many children face. For a child, the world is defined by the adults around them, especially those in positions of authority and trust. When that trust is compromised, the confusion that follows can be paralyzing, leading to a silence that lasts for years. Understanding why a child might wait to speak requires looking at the environment of the home. In a household where obedience is a primary virtue and family loyalty is held above almost all else, the pressure to maintain the status quo is immense. A child may not have the vocabulary to describe what happened, or they may fear that speaking out will cause the collapse of the family unit they rely on for survival. This is not a sign of the allegation being false, Rather, it is a documented response to the trauma of being harmed by someone familiar. Furthermore, the realization of what occurred often changes as a child matures. What might have felt confusing or uncomfortable at a young age can take on a much clearer, more painful meaning as they grow older and gain a better understanding of boundaries and consent. This delayed clarity is often what finally gives a victim the strength to come forward. They are no longer the small, dependent child they once were. They are individuals seeking to make sense of a past that was never properly addressed. In this case, the delay in reporting was not a gap in the truth, but a reflection of the internal struggle faced by the victim. It highlights the courage required to break a long-held silence, especially when doing so means challenging a powerful family narrative. By understanding these psychological hurdles, we can better appreciate the gravity of the moment when the silence finally ended, bringing the hidden events of that Florida vacation into the light of public and legal scrutiny. The turning point in the investigation arrived with the scheduling of a forensic interview, a specialized process designed to allow a child to speak about their experiences in a safe and neutral environment. Unlike a standard police interrogation, a forensic interview is conducted by trained professionals who use non-leading techniques to gather information. The atmosphere leading up to this interview was thick with a specific kind of tension, as the family and authorities waited to see if the quiet allegations would be substantiated by the child's own words. For the investigators, the forensic interview is often the most critical piece of evidence in a case involving a minor. It is the moment where the abstract claims of adults are replaced by the direct testimony of the person most affected. The stakes were incredibly high for Joseph Duggar and the entire family. If the child confirmed the details of the Florida trip, the legal machinery would move forward with unstoppable force. If the interview was inconclusive, the cloud of suspicion might remain, but the path to a criminal charge would become much more difficult. The process itself is rigorous. The interviewer must build rapport while maintaining a professional distance, ensuring that every statement made by the child is spontaneous and not influenced by outside pressure. In this instance, the report from the interview was described as a breakthrough. The child provided details that were consistent and specific, creating a narrative that law enforcement could no longer ignore. This was no longer just a family matter or a private disagreement. It was a documented account of harm. As the results of the forensic interview became known to the investigators, the focus of the case shifted. The tension that had been building since the initial report reached a new level of intensity. The evidence was mounting, and the next step would involve a direct confrontation with the man at the center of the storm. The forensic interview had provided the foundation, and now the authorities were prepared to move toward a resolution that would change the Duggar family forever. One of the most significant and explosive moments in the timeline of this case occurred when the father of the alleged victim confronted Joseph Duggar directly. This was not a legal proceeding or a formal interview, but a raw personal encounter between two men bound by family ties and a shared history. According to reports, the father sought answers about what had happened during that 2020 Florida vacation. Driven by a need to protect his child and understand the truth behind the growing allegations. During this confrontation, a reported admission took place that would become a cornerstone of the prosecution's case. It is said that Joseph Duggar, when faced with the direct questions of a grieving and angry father, did not offer a total denial. Instead, he reportedly made statements that were interpreted as an acknowledgement of his actions. This moment of vulnerability or honesty, depending on the perspective, transformed the investigation. It provided a level of confirmation that is often missing in cases that rely solely on the testimony of a young child. The impact of this admission on the family dynamic was immediate and devastating. For the father, Hearing a relative admit to harming his child was a betrayal of the highest order. It shattered any remaining hope that the allegations were a misunderstanding or a mistake. For Joseph Duggar, the reported admission was a turning point that he could not easily take back. It moved the case from the realm of suspicion to the realm of evidence, providing a clear path for law enforcement to follow. This confrontation serves as a reminder of the personal toll these cases take on everyone involved. It was a moment where the public image of the Duggar family was stripped away, leaving only the painful reality of a broken trust. The reported admission became a powerful piece of the story, one that would be cited repeatedly as the legal process began to unfold, marking the end of the family's ability to keep the matter private. At this point, it is necessary to pause and reflect on a difficult reality that this case brings to the forefront. We often want to believe that danger is something that comes from the outside, from strangers or from places we recognize as unsafe. However, the allegations against Joseph Duggar suggest a much more uncomfortable truth, that harmful behavior can, and often does, hide within the most trusted and familiar environments. It can exist in the homes of people who are respected, in families that are admired, and in settings that are meant to be sanctuaries. This realization is part of what makes true crime storytelling so vital when handled with care. It forces us to look past the surface of a well-maintained public image and ask deeper questions about safety and accountability. How often do we overlook red flags because they appear in a context we have been taught to trust? How often does the desire to protect a family's reputation outweigh the need to protect its most vulnerable members? These are not easy questions, but they are essential for understanding the dynamics of cases like this one. The Duggar family's story is a high-profile example of a phenomenon that happens in many communities. When a system is built on absolute authority and the suppression of dissent, it can inadvertently create spaces where harm can go unnoticed or unaddressed. By reflecting on this, we can begin to see the importance of transparency and the need for systems that prioritize the safety of individuals over the preservation of an image. It is a lesson that extends far beyond any single family or television show. As we continue to follow the events of this case, let us consider the courage it takes for victims to speak out against those they love, and the responsibility of the community to listen. The setting of a family vacation or a quiet home does not make the harm any less real. If anything, it makes the betrayal more profound. Recognizing this is the first step toward creating environments where trust is earned through safety, not just demanded through tradition. If you find value in this kind of careful, detailed, true crime storytelling that focuses on real-life lessons and the complexities of justice, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Sharing these stories helps us continue to explore the difficult truths that often hide behind public images, and your support allows us to maintain the depth and respect these cases deserve. By engaging with this content, you are joining a community that values accountability and the protection of those who cannot always speak for themselves. The exposure of the allegation against Joseph Duggar marked the end of an era for the family. What had started as a private concern during a Florida vacation had now grown into a full-scale legal and public crisis. Law enforcement was fully involved, the forensic evidence was being processed, and the reported admission had created a rift that could not be mended. The emotional peak of this exposure was a moment of total collapse for the family's carefully constructed image of moral perfection. The transition from a private family matter to a public investigation was swift and unforgiving. The Duggar name, already tarnished by previous scandals, was now linked to a new and deeply disturbing set of claims. There was no longer any way to contain the story within the family circle. The authorities were moving forward, and the public was beginning to learn the details of what had been hidden for so long. The sense of impending change was undeniable, as the family prepared to face the consequences of actions that had been brought into the light. The allegation is no longer a whisper. It is a formal challenge to the life Joseph Duggar had built. The family image, once a source of pride and profit, was now a liability. The stage was set for a legal battle that would test the limits of the family's influence and the strength of the justice system. The collapse was not just about one man, but about the entire world that Duggars had presented to the public, a world that was now being seen for what it truly was. The transition from an investigation to a formal arrest is the moment when the weight of the law finally settles on an individual. For Joseph Duggar, this reality manifested in Arkansas, far from the Florida beaches where the alleged events of 2020 had taken place. The arrest was not a sudden, isolated event, but the culmination of months of coordinated work between multiple jurisdictions. When law enforcement arrived to take him into custody, it signaled that the evidence gathered, including the forensic interview and the reported admissions, had reached the threshold required for criminal charges. This was the point of no return, where the private shield of the Duggar family name could no longer prevent the public machinery of justice from moving forward. The legal connection between the Arkansas arrest and the Florida case is a critical component of the prosecution's strategy. While the alleged crimes occurred in Florida, the suspect was a resident of Arkansas, necessitating a complex process of interstate cooperation. Investigators in Florida had been building their case based on the 2020 vacation timeline, but they required the assistance of Arkansas authorities to execute the warrant and secure the individual. This cross-border legal bridge highlights the seriousness of the allegations. When crimes involving minors are reported, state lines do not offer a sanctuary. The coordination between these two states ensured that the geographical distance between the location of the incident and the suspect's home did not hinder the pursuit of accountability. For the public, the news of the arrest in Arkansas provided the first concrete confirmation that the rumors surrounding Joseph Duggar were grounded in a formal legal process. It transformed the narrative from one of family gossip into a documented criminal matter. The arrest warrant itself served as a bridge, linking the specific details of the Florida trip to the current life Joseph was leading in Arkansas. It established a clear chronological link. The past actions alleged in Florida were now catching up to the present reality in his home state. This connection is vital for the story's flow, as it shows how a single disclosure can trigger a chain reaction that spans thousands of miles and multiple legal systems. As Joseph Duggar was processed into the system, the gravity of the situation became undeniable. The arrest was the first major domino to fall in a series of events that would eventually expand far beyond the initial Florida allegation. It set the stage for the extradition process and the subsequent court appearances that would dominate the headlines. By understanding the legal mechanics of this arrest, we see the beginning of a larger collapse. The sanctuary of the home in Arkansas was no longer a place of privacy, but a focal point for an investigation that was rapidly gaining momentum. The arrest was the catalyst that turned a hidden family crisis into a matter of public record, ensuring that the details of the 2020 Florida vacation would finally be addressed in a court of law. The formal legal machinery began to grind forward with clinical precision following the arrest of Joseph Duggar. The reported charges were specific and severe, centering on the allegations of sexual battery involving a minor under the age of 12 during that 2020 Florida trip. Because the warrant originated in Florida but the arrest occurred in Arkansas, a formal extradition process was required to bring him back to the jurisdiction where the alleged crimes took place. This process is often a bureaucratic hurdle, but in high-profile cases, it serves as a public reminder that the law has a long reach. Joseph eventually appeared before a judge to address these specific Florida allegations, marking the first time the details of the 2020 incident were read in an open courtroom setting. During his initial court appearances, Joseph Duggar entered a plea of not guilty. This plea is a standard legal maneuver, yet in the context of a family that had built its entire public identity on moral uprightness and biblical integrity, the words carried a heavy irony. The not guilty plea signaled that a long and arduous legal battle was ahead, one that would require the alleged victim and her family to potentially testify about the most traumatic moments of their lives. The defense began its work of scrutinizing every detail of the investigation, while the prosecution prepared to present the evidence gathered from the forensic interviews and the reported admissions made during the earlier family confrontations. The issue of bond became a central point of contention during these early hearings. While the court eventually granted a bond, allowing Joseph to remain out of jail while awaiting trial, it came with a set of stringent and highly specific conditions. The most significant of these was a total prohibition on having any contact with minors. This restriction was not merely a legal formality, it was a devastating blow to a man whose life was defined by his role as a father to multiple young children and his position within a massive, child-centric extended family. The bond conditions effectively severed him from the very environment he claimed to cherish, creating a physical and legal barrier between him and the next generation of the Duggar family. This specific condition barring contact with minors served as a loud public declaration of the court's concerns regarding the safety of children in his presence. It transformed his daily life into a series of navigated boundaries and legal landmines. Every family gathering, every trip to a public place, and every interaction within his own home had to be viewed through the lens of this court order. For a man who had grown up in the spotlight as part of a pro-family dynasty, being legally branded as a potential threat to children was a profound fall from grace. The bond and its accompanying restrictions were the first tangible signs that the legal system viewed the allegations not just as a past mistake, but as an ongoing risk that required constant monitoring and strict enforcement. The weight of a legal restriction is often measured not just by the words on a court document, but by the specific life it dismantles. For Joseph Duggar, the court-ordered prohibition on having any contact with minors was a surgical strike against the very core of his public and private. Identity. In the world of the Duggar family, a man's worth is inextricably linked to his role as a husband and, most importantly, as a father. To be legally barred from the presence of children is to be stripped of the primary function he was raised to fulfill. This was not a minor inconvenience. It was a total erasure of the life he had built with Kendra Duggar and their young children, Garrett David, Addison Renee, Brooklyn Praise, and Justice Joseph. The devastation of this restriction is amplified by the public nature of the Duggar brand. For years, the world watched as Joseph grew up in a household that prioritized the raising of children above all else. His marriage to Kendra was celebrated as the beginning of a new generation of that same legacy. When the court stepped in to mandate that he could no longer be around minors, it created a physical and emotional chasm within his own home. Imagine the reality of a father who cannot be in the same room as his own toddlers without a court-approved supervisor, or perhaps not at all, depending on the specific interpretation of the bond conditions at any given moment. The psychological toll of being labeled a risk to the very people he is supposed to protect is a burden that few can truly comprehend. Furthermore, this restriction served as a constant visible reminder to the community and the extended family of the gravity of the allegations. In a social circle where children are omnipresent, at church, at family meals, and at every social gathering, Joseph's absence, or his strictly monitored presence became a loud, silent testimony. It forced a confrontation with the reality that the perfect family image was a facade. The man who had been presented as a gentle, hard-working father was now legally categorized in a way that suggested he was a danger to the most vulnerable members of society. This shift in status from a respected patriarch in training to a monitored individual is a profound fall that resonates through every aspect of his daily existence. The emotional fallout for Kendra Duggar and the children cannot be overstated. As a wife, she was forced to navigate a reality where her husband was physically present, but legally sidelined from their shared life as parents. The children, too young to understand the complexities of the legal system, were suddenly living in a world where their father's role was fundamentally altered. This restriction did more than just protect potential victims. It dismantled the domestic sanctuary that the Duggars had always claimed was the safest place on Earth. By examining the depth of this devastation, we see the true cost of the allegations, not just in legal fees and court dates, but in the permanent fracturing of a family unit that once seemed unbreakable. The legal restrictions placed on Joseph Duggar were only the beginning of a much larger and more invasive process. While the initial focus of the authorities had been centered on the specific 2020 Florida vacation and the allegations of sexual battery, a significant turning point occurred as the investigation matured. Law enforcement began to look beyond the single incident and started to scrutinize the environment in which Joseph and Kendra Duggar were raising their own children in Arkansas. This shift transformed the case from a focused inquiry into a past event, into a comprehensive evaluation of their current household. It was no longer just about what may have happened years prior. It was about the safety and well-being of the minors currently living under their roof. This expansion of the investigation was a critical moment for the prosecution and for the public perception of the family. When authorities decide to broaden their scope to include a suspect's entire domestic life, it suggests that the initial evidence raised red flags about a potential pattern of behavior or a systemic lack of safety. For the Duggars, who had always presented their home as a fortress of faith and protection, having investigators turn their attention to the daily operations of their household was a profound intrusion. The questions being asked were no longer limited to a specific trip or a specific victim. They were now about the very nature of the environment Joseph and Kendra had created for Garrett David, Addison Renee, Brooklyn Praise, and Justice Joseph. The transition to a wider household investigation meant that every aspect of their private life was now subject to legal review. This included the physical layout of their home, the methods of discipline used, and the level of supervision provided to the children. Investigators were looking for any signs that the alleged behavior in Florida was not an isolated lapse, but part of a larger, more concerning reality. This turning point is essential to the story because it shows how a single disclosure can pull back the curtain on an entire lifestyle. The wider household investigation label signaled to the community that the authorities were taking no chances, treating the home not as a sanctuary, but as a potential site of ongoing risk. As the investigation expanded, the pressure on Joseph and Kendra intensified. They were no longer just defending against a specific criminal charge. They were now fighting to prove that their home was a fit environment for their children. This shift in focus brought a new level of scrutiny from Child Protective Services and local law enforcement in Arkansas, creating a multi-front legal battle. The narrative of the perfect Duggar home was being systematically dismantled by the very people tasked with ensuring public safety. By introducing this turning point, we see the moment when the case truly exploded, moving from a private family crisis into a comprehensive legal examination of the entire Duggar domestic structure. The expansion of the investigation into the Arkansas household soon yielded a second, distinct set of legal problems that fundamentally altered the trajectory of the case. While the Florida allegations centered solely on Joseph Duggar, the findings within their own home led authorities to file separate criminal charges against both Joseph and Kendra Duggar. These new Arkansas charges were not related to the 2020 vacation incident, but were instead focused on the immediate environment in which they were raising Garrett David, Addison Renee, Brooklyn Praise, and Justice Joseph. The specific counts included child endangerment and, most shockingly, false imprisonment. This development marked the first time Kendra was legally implicated in a criminal matter, shifting her role from a supportive spouse to a co-defendant in a separate but related legal battle. The charge of child endangerment in Arkansas suggested that investigators had discovered conditions or behaviors that placed the minors in the home at a substantial risk of physical or emotional harm. In the context of the Duggar family, where the protection of children is a central tenet of their public identity, such a charge was a direct indictment of their parenting and their domestic sanctuary. It implied a failure to provide a safe and secure environment, a claim that stood in stark contrast to the carefully curated image of a wholesome, God-fearing household. For Kendra Duggar, being charged alongside her husband meant that the legal system viewed her not just as a witness to his life, but as an active participant in the creation of a hazardous living situation for their own children. Even more disturbing was the charge of false imprisonment. This legal term typically refers to the unlawful restraint of a person's liberty, and its application in a domestic setting involving children raises immediate and terrifying questions. It suggested that the children were being held or confined in a manner that violated their basic rights and safety. The inclusion of this charge transformed the public perception of the Joseph Duggar household from one of strict discipline to one of potential systemic abuse and control. It was no longer just a question of a past mistake in Florida. It was now a question of the daily reality inside their Arkansas home, where the very walls meant to protect the family were now being scrutinized as tools of confinement. These separate Arkansas charges created a complex legal landscape for the couple. They were now facing two distinct sets of prosecutions in two different states, involving different victims and different alleged behaviors. The synergy between the Florida molestation case and the Arkansas endangerment case painted a picture of a family in total collapse. By detailing these specific charges, we see the moment when the legal pressure reached its absolute peak. Joseph and Kendra were now fighting for their freedom and for the right to remain a family, as the state of Arkansas moved to hold them both accountable for the conditions discovered behind the closed doors of their seemingly ordinary home. The physical reality of a home often speaks louder than any testimony, and for investigators in Arkansas, the most chilling evidence was found not in a digital file, but on the doors themselves. During the search of the Joseph Duggar residence, authorities reportedly discovered a series of locks installed on the exterior of bedroom doors inside the house. This single mechanical detail changed the emotional temperature of the entire story, shifting it from a case about a past allegation to a terrifying look at current domestic control. In a standard home, locks are placed on the inside of a room to provide privacy for the occupant. When they are placed on the outside, the room is no longer a sanctuary. It is a cell. This discovery provided the physical justification for the false imprisonment charges that had been leveled against both Joseph and Kendra. The presence of exterior locks on bedroom doors suggests a level of confinement that is fundamentally incompatible with a safe and nurturing environment for children. For the public, this detail was the moment the perfect Duggar image was irrevocably shattered. It conjured images of young children, including Garrett David, Addison Renee, Brooklyn Praise, and Justice Joseph, being trapped in rooms with no way to exit on their own. This was no longer a matter of strict religious discipline or biblical parenting. It was a matter of basic human rights and physical safety. The emotional impact of this revelation was profound, as it suggested that the danger inside the home was not just a person, but the very structure of the living environment itself. Investigators viewed these locks as a clear sign of systemic risk. They were not just looking at a single incident of neglect, but at a deliberate physical system of control and confinement. This detail explained why the Arkansas authorities felt it was necessary to charge both parents with child endangerment. If Kendra Duggar was aware of and participated in a household where children were routinely locked into rooms from the outside, she was an active participant in their endangerment. The locks served as a silent witness to the daily reality of life behind the closed doors of the Duggar home, providing a tangible link between the allegations of control and the physical evidence found by law enforcement. The emotional temperature of the case reached a boiling point as the public grappled with the implications of these exterior locks. It forced a re-evaluation of everything the Duggars had ever claimed about their family life. The protection they spoke of so frequently now looked like a form of imprisonment. This detail is a crucial turning point in the narrative because it moves the story beyond the specific actions of Joseph Duggar and into the broader culture of the household. It shows how a single, seemingly small physical detail can expose a massive, hidden system of harm. By focusing on these locks, we see the moment when the investigation truly unmasked the reality of the Joseph Duggar home, leaving no doubt that the safety of the children was at the center of the legal battle. The discovery of exterior locks on bedroom doors served as a chilling Rorschach test for both investigators and the public, revealing a dark subtext to the Joseph Duggar household. To the authorities in Arkansas, these physical modifications suggested a calculated system of possible confinement and control that went far beyond traditional parenting. It signaled a domestic environment where the liberty of the most vulnerable members, Garrett David, Addison Renee, Brooklyn Praise, and Justice Joseph, could be revoked at the turn of a key. This was the primary driver behind the child endangerment and false imprisonment charges. Investigators saw a home that had been structurally altered to facilitate a level of supervision that bordered on incarceration, raising urgent questions about the daily psychological and physical safety of the children living there. For the public, the allegations of confinement within an outwardly ordinary home were particularly disturbing because they challenged the very definition of a safe neighborhood. The Duggar residence did not look like a place of danger from the street. It looked like the home of a successful, growing family rooted in faith. This contrast between the public facade and the private reality created a sense of profound unease. It suggested that the most extreme forms of control can hide behind the most mundane appearances. The idea that a father and mother would systematically lock their children into rooms from the outside suggested a worldview where the autonomy of the child is entirely secondary to the absolute authority of the parent, a concept that resonated painfully with the known teachings of Bill Gothard. The implications of these allegations pointed toward a systemic danger that was both physical and ideological. Investigators were forced to consider whether the locks were a response to a specific behavioral issue or a standard operating procedure within the home. If it was the latter, it suggested a household where fear and restriction were the primary tools of management. This possibility of a controlled environment added a new layer of complexity to the Florida molestation case. It raised the question of whether a culture of silence and confinement in Arkansas had made it easier for other forms of harm to occur or go unreported. The public began to see the home not as a sanctuary of protection, but as a laboratory of extreme control. Ultimately, What these allegations suggested was a total breakdown of the healthy boundaries required for a child to thrive. The danger was not just in the potential for physical harm, but in the psychological impact of being raised in a space where one's own bedroom could become a cell. This realization shifted the narrative from a single criminal act by Joseph Duggar to a broader indictment of the entire domestic structure he and Kendra Duggar had built. By exploring these suggestions of confinement and control, we see the moment when the story becomes a cautionary tale about the dangers of unchecked patriarchal authority. It highlights the terrifying reality that for some children, the greatest risks are found not in the outside world, but within the very walls meant to keep them safe. In the complex web of legal proceedings surrounding the Duggar family, it is essential to maintain a clear distinction between the different jurisdictions and the specific nature of the allegations. While the public often groups these events together, the law treats them as separate matters with distinct defendants. A critical point of clarification is that Kendra Duggar was never accused or charged in the Florida molestation allegation involving the 2020 family vacation. That specific case, centered on the forensic interview and the reported admissions of sexual battery, was directed solely at Joseph Duggar. Kendra's legal troubles emerged later and were entirely tied to the findings within their Arkansas residence. This distinction is vital for understanding the narrative flow, as it shows how the investigation evolved from a single suspect to a broader examination of the parental environment. Kendra's separate charges in Arkansas, child endangerment and false imprisonment, were the direct result of the conditions discovered during the home inspection, specifically the exterior locks on the bedroom doors. The legal theory behind these charges was that as a mother and co-manager of the household, she had a duty to provide a safe and non-restrictive environment for Garrett David, Addison Renee, Brooklyn Praise, and Justice Joseph. By allowing or participating in a system where children were reportedly confined from the outside, she was legally implicated in the creation of a hazardous living situation. This was not an accusation of sexual misconduct, but an indictment of her role in the physical and psychological management of her own children. It transformed her public image from a supportive, perhaps unaware, spouse into a co-defendant facing serious criminal consequences for her own actions. The separation of these cases highlights the multi-layered nature of the crisis. Joseph Duggar was fighting a battle on two fronts: the Florida case, involving a past victim, and the Arkansas case, involving his own children. Kendra, meanwhile, was focused entirely on the Arkansas charges. This legal separation created a unique dynamic within their marriage and their defense strategy. While they were united in their not guilty pleas, the evidence required to prove or disprove the charges in each state was fundamentally different. In Florida, the case rested on testimony and interviews. In Arkansas, it rested on the physical evidence of the locks and the daily reality of the home environment. By clarifying this, we see the precise moment when the legal pressure on the couple became a shared burden, albeit for different reasons. Ultimately, the fact that Kendra was separately charged in Arkansas served as a powerful statement by the authorities. It suggested that the danger inside the home was not just the presence of Joseph, but a systemic failure of both parents to protect the rights and safety of their children. This clarification is necessary to prevent the audience from conflating the two cases and to ensure the story remains grounded in the documented legal facts. It shows that while the Florida incident may have been the catalyst, the Arkansas home environment became its own independent source of legal and moral scrutiny. Kendra's involvement was not a byproduct of her husband's alleged crimes, but a direct consequence of the choices made within the walls of their own home. The revelations from the Arkansas home inspection, specifically the discovery of exterior locks on bedroom doors, forced a terrifying re-evaluation of the entire Duggar domestic structure. It was no longer possible to view the allegations against Joseph Duggar as an isolated lapse in judgment during a single Florida vacation. Instead, the physical evidence suggested a deeply ingrained culture of confinement and absolute parental authority that permeated their daily lives. This shift from a specific criminal act to a systemic environment of control is perhaps the most disturbing aspect of the entire case. It raises a fundamental question that every community must confront. How often are the warning signs inside a family ignored or dismissed because the household outwardly appears ordinary, religious, or respectable? When we look at the charges of child endangerment and false imprisonment brought against both Joseph and Kendra Duggar, we are forced to look past the smiles and the coordinated outfits seen on television. We must ask ourselves if our society is too quick to grant total privacy to families who claim a higher moral ground, even when the physical reality of their home suggests a lack of basic safety for minors like Garrett David, Addison Renee, Brooklyn Praise, and Justice Joseph. Are we failing to protect the most vulnerable because we are blinded by a pro-family brand? I want to hear your thoughts on this in the comments below. Do you believe that the legal system should have more oversight in homes where extreme ideologies are practiced? Or is the privacy of the family unit still the ultimate priority? This moment in the story serves as a powerful reminder that one disclosure is often just the tip of a much larger iceberg. The initial report from the 2020 Florida trip acted as a catalyst, pulling back a curtain that had been tightly drawn for years. Once that barrier was breached, the authorities were able to see the larger system of risk, silence, and private control that had been allowed to flourish in the shadows. The locks on the doors were not just metal and wood. They were symbols of a worldview that prioritized the absolute power of the patriarch over the individual rights and safety of the children. This systemic control is what allowed the alleged behavior to remain hidden for so long, protected by a wall of family loyalty and religious justification. There is a growing sense that the Joseph Duggar case is about much more than one man's alleged crimes. It is about the failure of a system that was designed to protect children, but instead provided a sanctuary for their potential confinement. The transition from the Florida beaches to the locked bedrooms of Arkansas shows a narrative arc of increasing darkness and complexity. One brave disclosure exposed a hidden world where the ordinary appearance of a home was used to mask an extraordinary level of control. The investigation has now expanded far beyond its original borders, leaving us to wonder how many other secrets are still waiting to be uncovered within the vast and silent network of the Duggar dynasty. The Duggar family's response to the unfolding scandal was marked by a careful and measured approach, reflecting a deep awareness of the legal and public relations stakes involved. Public statements were sparse and meticulously worded, avoiding direct acknowledgement of the allegations while emphasizing faith, family unity, and the presumption of innocence. This cautious language served multiple purposes. It reassured supporters, maintained the family's public image, and navigated the complex legal landscape without jeopardizing ongoing proceedings. Family representatives and spokespeople often framed the situation as a private matter, urging respect for the family's privacy and the legal process. They highlighted the importance of prayer and healing, signaling a reliance on spiritual resilience rather than public confrontation. This approach was consistent with the family's long-standing emphasis on faith as a guiding principle, reinforcing the narrative that their values remained intact despite the turmoil. Behind the scenes, the family's communication strategy appeared to focus on controlling the narrative by limiting exposure and avoiding inflammatory remarks. This was evident in the absence of detailed interviews or public defenses from key family members. Instead, Statements were often released through official channels or trusted intermediaries, ensuring that the message remained consistent and legally prudent. The careful language also reflected an understanding of the broader cultural context in which the Duggar family operated. As public figures deeply embedded in conservative Christian communities, their words carried weight beyond the immediate scandal. Every phrase was chosen to resonate with their base, balancing acknowledgement of the situation with a call for compassion and unity. This delicate balancing act underscored the family's desire to weather the storm without fracturing their support network. In sum, the Duggar family's public response was a study in restraint and strategic communication. It revealed a family acutely aware of the stakes and determined to protect their legacy while navigating one of the most challenging periods in their history. This measured approach set the tone for the public fallout that would follow, shaping how the scandal was perceived both inside and outside the family circle. Within the Duggar family circle, the scandal sparked a range of reactions that revealed the complex dynamics at play behind closed doors. Jill Duggar Dillard, one of the most prominent voices among the siblings, expressed a mixture of sorrow and cautious support. While she refrained from commenting directly on the legal specifics, Jill's public statements emphasized the importance of grace, healing, and the need to protect the family's younger generation. Her words reflected a desire to balance loyalty with acknowledgement of the pain caused, signaling the emotional toll the situation had taken on those closest to the family. Amy Duggar King, a cousin who has often been outspoken about family matters, took a more critical stance. She highlighted the pattern of secrecy and control that she believed had long permeated the Duggar household. Amy's commentary brought attention to the broader cultural and ideological issues within the family, suggesting that the scandal was not an isolated incident but part of a recurring cycle. Her perspective resonated with many outside observers who had followed the family's history and were aware of previous controversies involving other members. These internal reactions underscored the tension between public image and private reality. While some family members sought to maintain a united front and emphasize forgiveness, others were more willing to confront the systemic problems that the scandal had exposed. This divergence illustrated the challenges of navigating loyalty, truth, and accountability within a tightly knit and highly publicized family. The responses from Jill, Amy, and others also highlighted the emotional complexity of the situation. For many, the scandal was not just a legal matter, but a deeply personal crisis that threatened to unravel long-standing relationships and beliefs. Their voices added nuance to the public discourse, reminding audiences that behind the headlines were real people grappling with difficult questions about faith, family, and justice. By bringing these family reactions into the narrative, the story gains depth and perspective. It moves beyond the legal proceedings to explore the human impact of the scandal, showing how it reverberated through the family's inner circle and shaped the ongoing conversation about accountability and healing. The current investigation into Joseph Duggar did not emerge in a vacuum. It unfolded against the long and complicated backdrop of the Duggar family's public history, particularly the shadow cast by Josh Duggar's own highly publicized scandals. For years, the family had been under intense scrutiny, following revelations about Josh's past misconduct, which had already challenged the carefully cultivated image of a devout, morally upright household. This earlier scandal left an indelible mark on the family's reputation and shaped public expectations about how they would handle subsequent allegations. Josh Duggar's case had introduced the world to the complexities and contradictions within the family's ideological framework. His actions and the family's response, marked by a mixture of denial, repentance, and attempts at image management, set a precedent for how future controversies would be navigated. The public memory of that scandal lingered, coloring perceptions of the family's internal dynamics and raising questions about the effectiveness of their strict obedience culture and patriarchal authority. In this context, the investigation into Joseph Duggar was seen by many as part of a troubling pattern rather than an isolated incident. Observers noted similarities in the way allegations surfaced, the family's initial responses, and the broader cultural environment that seemed to enable secrecy and silence. The long shadow of Josh's scandal amplified the stakes, as the family's ability to maintain credibility and cohesion was once again put to the test. This historical perspective also highlighted the challenges faced by those within the family who sought to speak out or distance themselves from the prevailing culture. The legacy of earlier abuse scandals created a complex web of loyalty, fear, and the desire for change. It underscored the difficulty of breaking free from deeply ingrained patterns, especially in a family that prized obedience and reputation above all else. By situating the current investigation within this wider family history, the story gains a richer dimension. It reveals how past events continue to influence present realities, and how the Duggar family's public narrative is intertwined with ongoing struggles over power, control, and accountability. This broader context is essential for understanding why the case resonated so deeply with the public, and why it sparked such intense debate about the family's values and practices. The Duggar family's ideological framework has long been a subject of scrutiny and criticism, especially in light of the recent investigation. Central to this critique is the family's adherence to a patriarchal structure that places the father's authority above all else, often at the expense of individual autonomy and safety. This system, deeply rooted in conservative religious beliefs, emphasizes strict obedience from children and wives, creating an environment where questioning authority is discouraged and silence is often maintained to preserve family unity. Image management has been another critical aspect of the family's approach. The Duggars cultivated a public persona of wholesomeness, faithfulness, and moral superiority, which was carefully maintained through media appearances, social media, and tightly controlled messaging. This focus on reputation often led to the suppression of uncomfortable truths and the prioritization of appearances over transparency. Critics argue that this obsession with maintaining a flawless image contributed to a culture where harmful behaviors could be hidden or minimized to avoid scandal. The obedience culture within the family further complicated matters. Children were taught to submit unquestioningly to parental authority, and this dynamic extended into adulthood for many siblings. While discipline and respect are common values in many families, the Duggar model has been criticized for crossing into control and coercion, limiting the ability of individuals to speak out or seek help. This culture of obedience, combined with the protection of reputation, created a powerful incentive to keep allegations and problems internal rather than addressing them openly. These ideological elements are not isolated. They interact to form a system that critics say enabled the perpetuation of abuse and neglect. The emphasis on patriarchal control, image preservation, and strict obedience created barriers to accountability and fostered an environment where victims might feel silenced or unsupported. The recent investigation into Joseph and Kendra Duggar brought these issues into sharp relief, prompting broader discussions about the dangers of unchecked authority and the costs of prioritizing reputation over safety. By examining these criticisms, the story moves beyond individual actions to explore the structural factors that shaped the family's response to the crisis. It highlights the need for cultural change and greater transparency in communities where similar dynamics exist. This analysis is essential for understanding the full impact of the Duggar scandal and the lessons it offers about power, control, and the importance of safeguarding vulnerable individuals. The Duggar case resonated deeply with the public because it intersected with several powerful and sensitive themes: celebrity, religion, children, secrecy, family power, and the unraveling of a carefully constructed moral brand. The family's celebrity status, built on reality television and social media, meant that their private lives were not just personal matters, but public spectacles. This visibility amplified the shock and fascination surrounding the allegations as viewers grappled with the contrast between the family's polished image and the disturbing realities emerging behind closed doors. Religion played a central role in shaping public perception. The Duggars had long been seen as exemplars of conservative Christian values, promoting large families, strict discipline, and unwavering faith. For many supporters, the family represented an ideal to aspire to, making the allegations feel like a betrayal of deeply held beliefs. This tension between faith and scandal created a complex emotional response, blending disappointment, disbelief, and a search for understanding. Children were at the heart of the story, evoking a universal protective instinct. The idea that minors could be harmed within a family that preached protection and purity struck a particularly raw nerve. The secrecy surrounding the family's internal dynamics only heightened concerns, as it suggested that appearances had been prioritized over the safety and well-being of the most vulnerable. This secrecy fed into broader societal fears about what might be hidden behind closed doors in other families and communities. The case also exposed the immense power wielded by the family patriarch and the broader Duggar network. This power, both social and ideological, had long shaped the family's public narrative and internal governance. The scandal revealed cracks in this power structure, showing how authority could be used to silence dissent and protect reputation at great cost. The collapse of the Duggar moral brand was not just a personal downfall, but a public reckoning with the limits of image management and the consequences of unchecked authority. Together, these elements created a perfect storm that captivated the public's attention and sparked widespread debate. The Duggar case became more than a legal matter. It was a cultural moment that challenged assumptions about family, faith, and celebrity. It forced a reckoning with uncomfortable questions about how society protects children, how power is exercised within families, and what happens when the image of morality is shattered by hidden truths. In the midst of public fascination and emotional responses, it is crucial to remember the fundamental principles of justice that govern cases like the Duggar investigation. The charges brought against Joseph and Kendra Duggar remain allegations until proven in a court of law. Legal proceedings are ongoing, and the presumption of innocence is a cornerstone of the judicial system. This cautionary reminder is essential to maintain fairness and prevent the rush to judgment that can distort both public perception and the lives of those involved. Non-fiction storytelling, especially in true crime, carries a significant responsibility to present facts accurately and without bias. The temptation to sensationalize or speculate can be strong, given the dramatic nature of such cases, but doing so risks undermining the integrity of the narrative and the dignity of the individuals affected. Accuracy ensures that the story respects the complexity of the legal process and the humanity of all parties, including victims, accused, and their families. The distinction between charges and convictions is not merely legal jargon, it reflects the difference between accusation and proof. Charges initiate the process, but they do not determine guilt. Courts must weigh evidence, hear testimony, and apply the law before reaching a verdict. Until that point, the narrative must remain open-ended, acknowledging uncertainty and the possibility of multiple outcomes. This legal caution also serves to protect the broader principles of justice and due process. It reminds audiences that while the allegations are serious and demand attention, they are part of a system designed to ensure fairness and prevent wrongful condemnation. Upholding these principles is vital, not only for the Duggar case, but for all cases that capture public interest. By emphasizing this caution, the story maintains its credibility and ethical grounding. It encourages viewers to engage critically with the information presented and to recognize the difference between reporting facts and drawing conclusions. This approach fosters a more informed and responsible public discourse, which is essential in cases that touch on sensitive issues of family, faith, and justice. The true weight of the Joseph Duggar investigation lies not in the specific legal filings or the celebrity status of the defendants, but in the sobering emotional message it leaves behind. This story is a profound illustration of the dangers that arise when authority is allowed to go entirely unquestioned within a closed system, whether in the context of the 2020 Florida vacation or the locked bedrooms discovered in Arkansas. The common thread is a power structure that prioritizes the absolute will of the patriarch over the individual safety of the vulnerable. When a family or a community creates an environment where questioning a leader is equated with a lack of faith, the natural safeguards that protect children begin to erode. The emotional core of this tragedy is the realization that safety was sacrificed on the altar of a rigid top-down hierarchy. Furthermore, this case serves as a haunting reminder of what happens when appearances are treated as more important than reality. For decades, the Duggar family brand was built on the image of a perfect, joyful, and protected household. This public facade acted as a shield, discouraging outside scrutiny and perhaps even internal dissent. The pressure to maintain the moral brand created a culture where admitting to problems or seeking help was seen as a betrayal of the family's mission. When the image becomes the priority, the actual well-being of the people behind that image often becomes secondary. The discovery of the exterior locks and the allegations of sexual battery are the physical and legal manifestations of a system that valued the look of a God-fearing home more than the actual security of the children living inside it. This message extends far beyond one famous household in Arkansas. It is a universal warning about any institution, be it religious, corporate, or familial, that operates with a lack of transparency and accountability. The Joseph Duggar story forces us to confront the reality that silence is the greatest ally of harm. When we allow ourselves to be blinded by a polished reputation or a charismatic leader, we risk missing the warning signs that are hiding in plain sight. The emotional resonance of this case comes from the collective understanding that the perfect family we watched on television was a construction designed to mask a much more complicated and controlled reality. Ultimately, the lesson beneath the headlines is that true safety requires the courage to ask difficult questions and the humility to accept accountability. It requires a culture where the voices of the vulnerable are heard and where no one is considered above the law or beyond reproach. By landing this emotional message, we move the narrative from a piece of gossip to a vital piece of social commentary. We are reminded that the protection of children must always come before the protection of a reputation, and that a home is only truly a sanctuary when it is built on a foundation of genuine safety rather than the fragile bricks of a public image. As we approach the conclusion of this investigation into Joseph and Kendra Duggar, we are left with more than just a series of legal updates. We are left with a profound opportunity for reflection. The details of the 2020 Florida vacation and the subsequent discovery of the Arkansas home conditions serve as a mirror, reflecting the vulnerabilities that exist when public image is prioritized over private safety. This case is a stark reminder that the stories we see on our screens are often carefully curated versions of reality, designed to protect a brand rather than the individuals within it. It challenges us to look deeper, to question the structures of authority we encounter, and to remain vigilant in our commitment to protecting the most vulnerable members of our society. I want to invite you to share your thoughts on this case in the comments below. How do you believe the public should respond when a moral brand like the Duggars collapses under the weight of such serious allegations? Do you think the legal system is doing enough to address the systemic issues of control and secrecy that often hide behind religious or celebrity facades? Your perspective is a vital part of this ongoing conversation, and I look forward to reading your insights. If you value this kind of grounded, non-fictional true crime storytelling that prioritizes accuracy and deep analysis over sensationalism, please consider subscribing. By joining this community, you help support the continued exploration of the real-life lessons hidden inside public scandals. The lessons we take from the Duggar story are not just about one family in Arkansas. They're about the collective responsibility we share to ensure that no one is above accountability. We must foster environments where the voices of children like Garrett David, Addison Renee, Brooklyn Praise, and Justice Joseph are heard, and where their safety is never sacrificed for the sake of a reputation. This case has shown us that the most dangerous secrets are often those kept in the name of protection or faith. By reflecting on these hidden realities, we can begin to build a culture that values transparency, integrity, and the genuine well-being of every individual over the fragile construction of a public image. Thank you for joining me on this journey through the complexities of the Joseph Duggar investigation. It is through these difficult conversations that we find the clarity needed to prevent similar tragedies in the future. As we move forward, let us carry the lessons of this story with us, remembering that the truth is often found in the quiet moments when the cameras are off and the public eye is elsewhere. By staying informed and engaged, we can help ensure that the legacy of this scandal is not just one of shock and disappointment, but one of meaningful change and a renewed commitment to the safety of all. The long journey through the Joseph Duggar investigation leads us back to the very beginning, to the quiet, unrecorded moments that exist far beyond the reach of a television crew. For years, the world watched a version of this family that was defined by bright lights, synchronized smiles, and a carefully scripted narrative of faith and protection. We were invited into their living rooms and invited to believe in a domestic sanctuary that seemed impenetrable. But as the legal documents from Florida and the physical evidence from Arkansas have shown, the real story was never what the cameras captured. The true fear, the one that lingers long after the screen goes dark, is the realization of what may have been happening in the silence, when the public eye was elsewhere and the only witnesses were the four walls of a locked bedroom. This haunting conclusion forces us to confront the fragility of the perfect image. The exterior locks on the doors in Arkansas and the allegations of sexual battery during a 2020 family vacation are not just legal data points. They are windows into a private world of possible confinement and control. They suggest a reality where the safety of Garrett David, Addison, Renee, Brooklyn Praise, and Justice Joseph was managed by a system that prioritized the absolute authority of the patriarch over the individual rights of the child. The contrast between the public, pro-family brand and the private allegations of endangerment is a chilling reminder that the most profound harms often occur in the spaces we are told are the safest. The cameras showed us a sanctuary, but the investigation revealed a potential cell. As we reflect on the legacy of the Duggar family, we must acknowledge that the real tragedy is the culture of silence that allowed these secrets to remain hidden for so long. The legacy of silence is not just a phrase, it is a physical and psychological barrier that protects the powerful and isolates the vulnerable. It is the mechanism that turns a home into a place of risk and a family into a closed system of unquestioned authority. The Joseph Duggar case is a powerful indictment of any ideology that values reputation over reality and obedience over safety. It serves as a permanent warning that the most dangerous threats are often those that hide behind a mask of moral superiority and religious devotion. The story of Joseph and Kendra Duggar ends not with a clear resolution, but with a lingering sense of unease. It leaves us with the haunting image of a home that outwardly looked ordinary but inwardly may have been a place of profound restriction. The real fear was never the scandal itself, but the years of quiet, private control that preceded it. As we close this chapter, let us remember that the truth is found not in what is shown, but in what is hidden. The lesson of the Duggar family is that we must always look closer, ask the difficult questions, and never allow the bright lights of a public image to blind us to the reality of what happens when no one is watching.